do understand that whatever technology we're using has to be driven by our student needs. That is that the principle that who we teach comes before what we teach still holds, but now there are greater questions about how we teach. And I think a lot of challenges, but opportunities as well. So one of the things that, and this came up in the English department meetings, that we're all dealing with is how to prioritize our assignments. How close can we stay to our original course plans, since they were all very much in progress when we shifted to online learning? And obviously this would be a very different conversation if we were talking about how to start a course and teach an entire course online. And I hope we never have to have that conversation. But let's just pretend that we'll never have to have that conversation. So one of the things the first things that I ask myself is, what is absolutely essential? What is desirable but not absolutely essential? And how can I make sure that the most essential elements of writing instruction are delivered in as close to the same way that I would under normal circumstances? My sense is that we're all adjusting our syllabi, dropping some readings perhaps, and also deciding about whether there are writing assignments that we can also forego without losing focus on the centerpiece of English 220 and a lot of English courses, which is the research paper that comes, or the term paper that comes at the end of the semester. So as I've been getting from teachers, there is the usual mix of substantial papers, especially the end of semester paper, formal response papers, informal response papers, discussion boards and blog posts, which many teachers use already, in-class writing, quizzes, final exams. So how then to adjust the mix or move that mix online? And in some ways, the discussion board and blog posts obviously are the easiest because we're already doing that. And in terms of receiving and commenting on assignments, many teachers already use electronic submissions and comments. So that part of the equation is in a sense the easiest to adapt to our circumstances, as well as the email exchanges that we already have with students, but that may increase both in volume and in importance over the course of the last few weeks. I can tell you that from what I've heard from 220 teachers, some of whom are here today, that a broad variety of approaches seem to be working. Many teachers are using synchronous sessions to teach specific aspects of writing, developing a thesis, incorporating and working with critical sources, organization, library sessions, for instance. And I've heard from a couple of teachers that live, real-time library sessions, either with or without our librarian, have gone very well, and particularly using the chat function to receive student questions and bibliographic citations. I want to give a shout out, big shout out to Jennifer Newman, who I think I saw joined here. She recorded a 15-minute video for my class that was uploaded to YouTube that took students step by step through searches, what a search would look like on the specific works that they're going to be writing about. And students found that enormously helpful, and I was able to incorporate that into a live session. A number of teachers are also using screen sharing. I must admit, I don't yet know how to do that, but I probably should learn. And they've been using it in a couple of different ways: to put sample papers up for the entire class to discuss, or to use library materials. I've heard from several teachers that they've had particular success with breakout rooms on Zoom for group work and peer review, where they can drop in and speak to students in those separate rooms. Other teachers are making use of Google Docs, and I don't know about for other courses, but for 220, peer review is an important part of the research paper process. We all use it in one form or another. So some teachers are using Google Docs, and the peer groups can go in and annotate each other's papers and see those annotations, and then come to the live session and meet in breakout rooms to discuss the annotations and to discuss the papers. And that seems to be working well for the people who have been using it. I think also one-to-one sessions in Zoom and Collaborate. I've done several of them and they seem to go very well, and we can schedule students as we would during our office hours, and a number of teachers are using class time, scheduled class time to meet individually with students. So I think that there's been an interesting and very effective use of synchronous and asynchronous strategies for teaching, and my sense is that we're focusing on that which is essential. If there's one less response paper, fine. If there are a couple of fewer quizzes or in-class writings at this point, that's fine too. That the focus is really providing the instruction and the support for students to work on their research papers. And I think that Gavin actually will talk about one of the ways that he's adapting the research assignment itself. And a number of us are thinking about that. It's a little more complicated in English 220 because students have to acquire the skills through the research paper that they're going to need, not only in other English courses, but in any other course that they take in the college that requires writing. So in some ways, there's a little less flexibility in 220 than there might be, say, in our courses for the major. Let me just finish by citing, and I'm sure this comes as no surprise to anyone, the main challenges, and that has been students having access to technology, glitches with the technology, but more than anything, students reporting that it's been very difficult for them to find the time, the quiet space, to put in the sustained thought and practice of writing that is necessary in order to complete a substantial research paper. Many students are used to working in the library or at their local cafe or other places where they can have the space and time to themselves. And I think that we need to be cognizant of that and to accommodate that to the extent that we can. So I would just leave with a couple of questions that we may or may not address today. One, the most general is perhaps how do we tailor our instruction for students not only with different academic needs, but very different personal circumstances. And I'm not talking so much about specific assignments, but how we manage those assignments and how we help students manage those assignments. And perhaps related to that, and this is a conversation that we've been having among faculty in the English department, do we change our expectations to any extent this semester? And do we change the way that we evaluate student work? And if so, how so? What might that look like within the context of in the case of English 120 and 220, the course-wide rubrics and requirements that have long been established? I think I've talked long enough and I'm tired of looking at this little. I will gladly turn things over to Gavin.
Thanks, Mark. Gavin, I made you the co-host, so you should be able to share your screen. I think we'll also talk about the researching aspects that Mark brought up. And I'll just mention real quick before Gavin starts, I'll save the chat. So if you have any, there's some good discussion going on in the chat if you have questions, and if you have any particular links or resources, we'll save the chat and then we'll add that to the archived lunchtime seminar. So if Gavin is there, feel free to jump in. There we go. And he's sharing his screen. Perfect.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm sharing my screen. So I want to pick up on a few things that Mark mentioned. One of them was about the kind of places for thinking about anything at the moment for our students, but particularly for the purposes of this seminar about writing, because that was definitely one of the things that spurred my thinking or rethinking about my research paper that I'm asking my, in this case, MA students to do, but I think it's applicable for a number of courses. And also to say something that, to also kind of lead off from where Mark, something that Mark was speaking about, which is how applicable this may be for 220, possibly not, at least not in the form that I'm currently sharing it. And for other classes that are very much intended for students to learn a set of skills, this is maybe more applicable to courses where hopefully they've had some of these ideas in front of them before. So they may have done 220, but how to kind of think research, think a large scale project at a time where finding the space even to think is incredibly difficult, let alone to write. And what I'm sharing with you at the moment, I'm very happy for this to be circulated among folks if they want to take a look at it, is the project that I kind of somewhat haphazardly got to through realizing a few things that were working early on in our transition to online distance learning, and a few things that were not, or I could anticipate were not going to work. And one of the things that was working was sessions. I'm using Collaborate, sessions in Collaborate, and with a relatively small group of students, admittedly, to be able to work both as a group at large, but also in breakout groups. I've been using that a lot. That the discussion has continued its trajectory. It hasn't flatlined. It hasn't gone into, hasn't gone down. It's been very vibrant. And I think for a number of our students, and I think this is shared certainly from our conversations in the English department, our sense is that the place of community, that however distant it is, that Zoom or Collaborate or whatever it is can offer, even if it is coupled with other forms of asynchronous teaching. It certainly worked well for me and for our class. So that's something I wanted to maintain. And I haven't actually cut any readings for this course. I've maintained those readings. But I have changed the research paper, and that's what I sort of want to just kind of briefly talk about now. As you can see there, I hope, it's called The Paper I Would Have Written. And it is sort of on the basis of a usual expectation for this level and for a number of upper level courses would be a large research project at the end. And you can see there, initially I'd asked them to write a 15 to 20 page research paper, and that is not what I'm asking them to do now. But I want them to think about the paper that they would have written, to think about, in an ideal world, what they would have been able to commit to paper. And partly that's spurred by, as I say, having the time to think, and partly that's spurred by what I found myself doing in the early stages of our move, when I was giving people feedback on presentations that they've been giving, and found myself suggesting things that I knew they would not be able to access, even with the vast array of stuff that we have at Hunter that is available digitally through the library. That things that I would, my immediate reflex for certain things that I knew would help foster their engagement, I knew that they wouldn't be able to get. So I wanted to kind of rethink my expectation in terms of the level of research that they could do, and particularly kind of real deep engagement with texts. They may be able to find out research materials, but they may get no further than an abstract because that book is not available digitally, or that article is not one that is part of a journal that we have access to at Hunter. And I've also encouraged my students to join the New York Public Library to kind of fit in some of the gaps that Hunter may have, or CUNY may have. So it's partly like, a lot of my standbys for, you're thinking about Shakespeare and nature, go to, oh, that's not available. And I don't have it because it's in the office and I can't get to the office and I have like, 4 books here or something like that. So it was partly because I kept kind of finding myself giving bad advice and bad sort of sources. So among the things you see, and I'll start to sort of scroll down a bit, so the things that I'm asking them to do is devise a research project relevant to the themes of the course, but instead of writing the whole thing, write 4 opening paragraphs that set out the argument to the project. Paragraphs that should be in full sentences. I do want them to be some formal writing elements to this. But then sort of write or map out the structure of the rest of the project, making clear what parts of the text or text they're writing about, what they are and how they relate to their argument. And then include one final paragraph that can either be the conclusion to the paper as they see it, or a reflection on the process of devising the research project. And I'm kind of urging students to take seriously the set B as a kind of a very valid writing exercise, in part because I think a lot of people at this stage will be able to write a conclusion that is basically the same as their introduction. And I never think that's a very good conclusion. So they also wanted to include a bibliography of secondary sources with which they can claim to have some familiarity and which I will be able to spot when I'm looking at this to tell that, oh, that's a well-chosen text, even if they haven't read it, even if all they know is the title and they've seen it cited by other people, that they know that this is relevant to what they're talking about. And I've also given them a sort of as much material as I have access to, just on my own computer, that they may not be able to get any other way. I've made that available to them through Blackboard. I've kind of raided my own sort of stuff. And you'll see here, and this is a long document, and I wouldn't ever claim that anyone should model their writing documents, their assignment documents on the way that I do, because I'm a little chatty and verbose, and I know that a lot of the time being more direct and more kind of perhaps clear is the way too. So this is very much designed to things that we had already been talking about. It's very particular to this course, but there may be some language here that is useful, and you see all of this stuff is not. Perhaps so much is very specific, but maybe the sort of the opening stuff is the sort of the main thing. And one of the things that I think it's made me reflect on a little bit as the, I don't know, the silver lining, or the, it's a pretty small silver lining on a pretty large cloud, but to rethink what even kind of projects I'm asking my students to do anyway. So you see in the paragraph that I kind of stopped on here, let's see. Which are the first ones is what do you mean by a research project? Oh, and by the way, shout out to Jack Kenningsberg, whose structure of framing assignments and framing syllabi and all that kind of stuff in terms of questions, I've also sort of adopted this semester and liked thinking in these ways of what kind of questions a student might have. So what I'm also encouraging students to do, and this is somewhat of a luxury, it's an MA course, it's not kind of designed to introduce them to certain ways of writing, it's an attempt to help them develop ways of writing and ways of thinking about writing and ways to think about having a research project, is to kind of make them think somewhat experimentally. This is an experimental form. And I'm encouraging them to think about different ways of conceiving of research in a way that I think if we were doing this in a regular class, I would be a little stricter on. So my hope is that they can it'll open the doors a little bit. Obviously, this is still work and it's still writing and it's not ignoring the importance of writing. But one of my kind of senses from my students was that having time to sit down to write was hard. Finding moments to think was less hard, in part because they were finding moments where they could have thoughts. Every small assignment that they've done up to this point has been considered as been of the same quality as it was before we broke and went to distance learning. So it's trying to kind of capture some of that spirit while also kind of acknowledging the limitations. And finally, I want to share something else, because this may be somewhat familiar to any of you who know, let's see. Okay, oh, wrong one. Okay, can you folks see I've shifted to something else? There's something else popped up.
That's good.
Okay, great. This is my source of inspiration, and you may be kind of thinking, well, that's an MA class, that is not applicable. The inspiration for this is actually, and many of you know him, the wonderful Jeff Allred, who is on leave at the moment, but one of the gifts he gave us as an English department was this course that he devised, part of English 252, so a step ahead of English 220, but still kind of early in an undergraduate's life in the English major, and his project guidelines. And I'll also include a link to this website. It's all up on, I think it's on the Commons. That his final project guidelines are basically what I've built out of. That he does not ask students in his version of English 252 to come up with an extensive research paper. He asks them to come up with a well thought through research project and kind of think about the structure of writing in that project. So I will send this around in the chat, and so folks have it. And yeah, with that, I will hand things back over to Paul and to Jack.
Thanks, Gavin. It's great. Really appreciate. I think you have to just stop sharing your screen. There you go. Perfect. And pass it off to Jack. But great information.
All right. Thank you. So I want to start actually by responding to something that Mark said about not wanting to have that conversation about creating an online course from the beginning. And for those of us who are teaching in the summer, that's exactly what I need to be doing. And
I realized that as soon as I said it.
and there will be, I think, 120 and 220 sections in the summer. So at least some of us have to be thinking about that, whether we want to or not. And I'm not thinking beyond the summer at this point, but I think that the point that Mark, that you made when you really opened that distinguishing between a thoughtfully and thoroughly conceived online course, which people have been doing for years and years, is fundamentally different than what we're doing, which is doing something, really in the span of like a few days, then a break, then another few days, and essentially trying to salvage this semester, where we were not really prepared for this, and our students were not prepared for this. So there is, I mean, the point that you made earlier is like that this is a fundamentally different animal than, honestly, what we hope to do in the summer, which it will be like a start to finish online course. And even though, the president is promoting summer and requesting people, no one has to sign up for summer, right? The students who are signing up for summer, they know it's going to be online, and their mentality is going to be different. That doesn't mean their resources will be different. They may suffer from the same lack of resource. And I know in a couple of cases from students who are registered for my summer course that they do suffer from a lack of resources. But they're going into that course knowing this, as opposed to all of our students right now who were just as gobsmacked by the changes as we were. So I want to talk a little bit about my experience teaching, but mostly what I'm hearing from and what I'm seeing and hearing from my tutors at the Writing Center. And for those of you who haven't gotten any emails from me, the Writing Center, I just want to point out, is still open. I'm throwing the link in the chat for students who want to sign up. We are live, and you can bounce that email. You can bounce that URL to your students. They can just sign up directly to work with somebody. But before I get to the Writing Center, just think about my own class, and as I was transitioning my own class, and I'm teaching Structure of Modern English, which is not a literature class. It's not a writing intensive class. There were papers, so the needs of that class are very different than obviously anything in English 120 or 220. Obviously, very, very different, Gavin, than the needs of students in a literature seminar. But one of the best pieces of advice that I heard, and I don't remember where I heard this from, was the idea of decoupling some of the things that we do, that we ordinarily would do in a live class. Like in a live class, there's a bit of us talking, there's a bit of them working, there's certain things that work really well. That mix of direct instruction and student activity, and trying to replicate that online isn't necessarily the best strategy, maybe a better strategy, and I say maybe because obviously we're all in different circumstances, is to decouple certain things that we would ordinarily do in a class, which might be immediately followed by students doing something. Maybe it doesn't have to be immediately followed by students doing something. Maybe we can do our thing at one point and they could do their thing at a different point. And as long as we are doing what we would be doing in terms of direct instruction and providing resources, as long as they are doing what they need to be doing in terms of practicing, they don't necessarily have to be on exactly the same schedule as they would be if it's face-to-face in a live classroom. We can, and maybe we should, reconceive of when everyone does the work that they do in relation to each other. And so for me, my choice was to go almost entirely asynchronous, where I provide a certain amount of lecturing, discussion, whatever, and then they do all the practicing on their own separately, as opposed to 5 minutes of me talking, 10 minutes of them working, 5 minutes of me talking, 10 minutes of them working. And so I think that for me, that was like the best piece of advice. And I think it really sort of is another side or maybe another manifestation of what Mark was talking about, and sort of what Gavin was talking about sort of thinking about what your course goals are. Because ultimately, I think the point of the course is for the students to learn something by the end, and to be able to demonstrate that they have learned something by the end of the course. And the way that I think most of us build the course is to get them from wherever they start. And the first few classes are often us sort of figuring out where are they all, or clustering them, and then bringing them to where we want them to be by the end. But all that plan, that sort of set of scaffolding, whether that's in terms of the material we're presenting to them, and certainly in terms of the shorter assignments that build up to the long one, to some degree, those are much more arbitrary than the final assignment, which is where they demonstrate their knowledge and their ability to internalize and use the knowledge in an interesting and in an interesting way, in a novel way. And so it may be possible, I think, for us to sort of reconceive how we build them to that larger assignment. I know certainly, when I've told English 120, that means sometimes, an almost full draft of a research paper before the final draft. Is that necessarily going to translate easily online? I saw that people were talking about peer review in the comments, in the chat. People were asking about peer review. Well, if you have to write a 7-8 page draft, they need to be able to review that with peers or with somebody before they can turn it into a final paper. But the draft is a scaffold. The draft is designed to get them from here to there. Are there other routes to get them from here to there? Maybe the assignment is done in stages, where you write 2 pages now, then 2 pages, then 2 pages, and it's incremental rather than a whole draft and then a whole final draft. So I think that there are potentially ways for us to sort of reconceptualize the scaffolding, and I've probably said that 5 times, so I'm going to not say it anymore. And maybe that's also something that we cannot necessarily do right now, because right now we're scrambling as much as our students. But I think that if and when we get to that point where we have to think about creating the course as an online course from the beginning, rather than simply trying to map the original course, the face-to-face course, onto Blackboard, that may be not quite as fruitful as trying to sort of figure out, okay, well, what does online do well? What are the strengths of an online interface? Rather than what are only the weaknesses, and trying to sort of say, well, it doesn't do this as well as a classroom. That's right, it won't do certain things as well as a classroom, but it might do other things well, and then trying to sort of map the course onto what the strengths of an online platform might be. And so at the Writing Center, I mean, certainly we're doing a lot of live tutoring. It's not through Zoom. We have a scheduling platform called WC Online, but there's live video conferencing. We have a whiteboard. And one of the things that, our tutors can do when they're talking about a whiteboard is what we're doing in the chat is you can throw down links, right? You can't do that in a face-to-face conversation. Like a tutor, and when we're face-to-face, tutors often do go to our cabinet and get a handout for a student. And if they're by a computer, they can call up the Purdue OWL and other resources. But you can't just like throw a link onto somebody's paper if you're physically sharing a table. Whereas if you are online and you're working live, you can actually throw a link in. And so if tutors have sort of their list of favorite resources to share with students, that's something that they can do. It's something that they are doing on a regular basis. Even when they're video chatting, even though 90% of the session is people like us right now doing talking, they can also have that sort of second conversation in comments and chat. And so that is, I think, just a small example of the strength of an online delivery system or an online platform compared to a live platform. I do just want to again follow up on things that Gavin and Mark were saying. I know that my own students are incredibly stressed. They are reporting to me because I've had sometimes hour-long conversations with them over Zoom or Blackboard Collaborate. That some classes they have what feels like much more work because they're getting a million discussion board assignments. In some classes, it feels like much less work because their instructors have scaled down the amount that is being due. Our tutors are reporting the same thing. We have probably more cancellations from people who have weekly appointments than we usually do because the students are saying they don't really have that much work this week. But when they do get there, they're incredibly, incredibly stressed. And the first 5-10 minutes of many, many sessions is a how are you doing? Is everyone okay? And without that conversation, the session would never be productive because everyone would be too stressed. But we're seeing, and my tutors are telling me that there's incredibly high stress levels. Privacy is an issue. One of my tutors, who is in some ways very much like me, just very, very talkative, processes a lot of things just by always talking them out. He's very talkative in staff meetings. He's very talkative in class. He's told me that he never talks in Zoom anymore on his Zoom classes because he has no privacy. And he doesn't necessarily want his family hearing him interacting with his class. So it's just sort of really shut him down. And he feels he's not learning as well because he's a chatty guy who needs to talk to get things through. And then his family is fairly conservative, and so he's afraid sometimes when he's tutoring that if he gets a student who's writing about something gender-related, they will overhear him, and then he'll get flack for it, even though it wasn't even his paper. And certainly, for his own, schoolwork, he feels like he's tiptoeing around certain family members. So, I think that, again, what our students are going through, I think, is um, very uneven in their experiences, but also uneven in terms of what they're getting from their instructors. I know I removed a writing assignment from my class because it wasn't. I liked it. It was, it would have been a useful addition, but it wasn't the key thing that my class needs to be about. I know, and like I said, other instructors seem to be adding more short things, which puts a lot of stress on students to find the time to do those. Other instructors are doing fewer things, and so, and there's nothing that can be done. But I think that's always going to be the case. That different instructors have different approaches to assignments. But I think that we also need to remember that that's going to affect our students in a lot of ways, and that's going to affect their ability to write in a lot of ways. The more stress that they are under, the more uncertainty that they face, that's just going to create like a barrier to their ability to sit down, think, and produce. And so I don't know that what I've just said has been really that useful in terms of teaching writing. It's more, but I think that I will stop now before I monopolize the rest of the conversation by babbling. So.
No, it was great, Jack, and we'll hand it over to the librarians. But there's a couple of chats there. I think it's been very useful for everyone, and we'll definitely circle back to a couple of things, especially about this creating community and collaborative writing. But let's hand it off to, I don't know if Stephanie or Sarah wanted to go first to talk about their perspective of the library and how teaching and writing and research papers are going. Whichever one wants to jump in first.
That's me. I've been elected as the representative for right now. There's a number of my library colleagues online as well, and so I'm going to just sort of speak generally, and then I'm going to throw it to other people to weigh in on things that I have forgotten. So I think most important for everyone to know who's still teaching research projects is that the librarians are still working. We are here for you. The library is open online always. We still do instruction with classes. We still are doing the online reference service, Ask a Librarian, so students can chat live with a librarian any time of the day or night. Hunter librarians are on from 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. Monday through Thursday. We are on until 6 on Fridays. We're on the weekends. And when we are not on, other librarians are available, and the questions always get flagged for follow-up. So if your students have Hunter-specific questions, they will come back to us and we will follow up with them. And those are, again, real life people, not robots or artificial intelligence on the other end of those chats. It's actual librarians. We also still are doing one-on-one consultations with students. We do research consultations, and students can schedule those with us individually. We have a form on our website under the Ask a Librarian link as well, or if students know us from a class, they're welcome to reach out to a librarian that they know individually. But we are more than happy to work with students on a one-to-one basis, either through a platform of their choice or talking on the phone, however works best with them, via email. We do all kinds of consultations with students still. Let's see. Of course, all of our online resources are still available. All of our online databases, any ebooks you can access. Of course, access to print materials is a no-no right now. We can't go into the library to scan books or chapters for people. But that being said, our interlibrary loan department is working overtime right now to get access to articles and book chapters and theses and anything else that can be requested through interlibrary loan that isn't in physical print. So if you have an item that you need that we don't have access to through our online resources, you can still place interlibrary loan requests. They just might take more time, or you might get an email from Gowan, who runs our interlibrary loan, that it's inaccessible now, but it's still worth a shot. So especially for upper division students, I think that's really important to know that lots of materials are still available via our interlibrary loan, but there are just some things we can't access right now. And I will say, just anecdotally from my experiences working with the students in the chat reference, that's probably the highest percentage of questions are, I really need this print book right now. Can you help me? And the answer, unfortunately, right now is, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that, but let's help you find some other things that you might be able to use. So we're happy to work with your students to find alternatives, for you to find alternatives. So in creating these research assignments, rethinking the types of resources you're asking your students to access and find. In addition to the subscription databases we have, there in the chat, there were a bunch of links put in there about accessing New York Public Library resources. There's a ton of open access research. There are institutional repositories. There are lots and lots and lots of ways for students to get access to good content. And again, we're happy to work with you on either creating assignments to help students use these tools or find these resources or schedule appointments with us. And I'm going to actually pass over to my colleague, Jennifer Newman, who is the liaison to the English department, who has done a ton of instruction already. And she's going to talk a little bit about her synchronous classes and things that she's done.
Okay, so hi, everybody. I don't have a ton to add in addition to what Sarah said, but I'm the English and Humanities librarian. I've been working with a lot of 200, 300 level English classes since we've moved online. So I can come in to Zoom, to Blackboard, collaborate, screen share, walk through the same kind of lesson that we would do in person. And it's been going really well. And I think the first few were a little difficult, but I think as instructors and students get more comfortable with learning this way, I've actually gotten a lot more engagement from students in online classes than I maybe would in person. So if I ask a room full of students a question, they might get a little shy, but if they're on chat and Blackboard Collaborate, I get a lot more answers. And just a lot of comments like, oh, wow, I didn't know this service was available to me. I didn't know about this database. So it seems to be very useful to the students. I think they're grateful to have librarians help. And the synchronous sessions, another advantage there is to have the librarian in person to ask any questions, from simple access questions, like one student in an English 220 class was actually not a Hunter student. She or he, I can't remember, but was taking the class here, but is actually a student at another CUNY school and couldn't even get into our resources and didn't know what was available to them. So these kind of questions I can just nip in the bud in person. For those who are doing asynchronous classes, like for Mark Balbro's 252, he told me what he wanted. I made a 15-minute video and put it on YouTube related to that specific assignment. So I'm here to work with you. Also, I see Donna Paparella in the chat. She does with her children's literature course a primary source assignment, and we're still able to do that online with all of the primary sources that are digitized. So there's all sorts of things that we can do. We can be very flexible, and I'll just put my email address here in the chat for English. So it's not just me teaching the English courses, I should say. All of the librarians are involved. But reach out to me as the point person, and also contact me about access to materials. So just one example, the first week after we went online, I heard from somebody in the English department looking for a contemporary novel for all of her students to read and wondering if we could buy it. And in fact, the New York Public Library had over 100 ebook copies of that novel, most of which were available. So it was a very quick workaround. They can get it immediately from the New York Public Library. So if you have any kinds of questions like that, don't hesitate to contact me or anyone else in the library. And as Sarah mentioned, the Ask a Librarian chat is getting a lot of use these days. And I think the students like to be able to have immediate 24/7 help with access, or, you know, what keywords do I search for this topic? How does this database work? That sort of thing. So be aware that we're available. And that's all.
Great, thank you, Sarah and Jennifer.
One more thing before we finish with the library.
Go ahead.
Jennifer, in addition to all the great work she's doing in person in classes, made really, really excellent research guides for English 120, English 220, English in general, I think, and that I know some of them have a lot about New York Public Library resources as well. So if you haven't been in contact with your librarian, or you don't really want to do an in-person session, you might still point yourselves and your students to some of those guides, because they can be super helpful regardless of the situation.
Yeah, and I know Alexandra.
Does anybody know where to find those research guides? I don't know if we, Paul, do you want to make me a host for a second so I can show folks where to find them?
I sure do. I was gonna say, I know Alexandra and Scott have been updating those OER materials as well. Where's Sarah Ward? Let's see. Make you a co-host. All right, you should be now able to share your screen.
Okay, give me 1 second to get the proper thing on my screen. Okay, So can everyone see the library website?
Mhm.
Okay, so over here on the left-hand side where it says research guides, all of these are what Stephanie was just referring to. So you'll notice that there are all these different subject guides for all the departments and programs at Hunter. And within each of these, there are some course-specific guides. There's one here for English 120 for all sections that Jennifer has worked on. And then we also have more under English language and literature. There's the English 220 Introduction to Writing About Literature, and it's full of excellent resources. So you can see here each of these tabs. So even if, again, you don't work with a librarian, these research guides are available all the time. And if you have questions about them, please reach out to us and we can work with you. Okay.
Awesome. I'm just going to stop the recording because I think that was a good amount of information to record if we can post it.